Welcome back. In the previous session, Paul had stood before the Sanhedrin and found at once that they were unlikely to provide him a fair trial. Let's return to the chamber. Now, when Paul perceived that one part was Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial." Readers have sometimes been uncomfortable with Paul's outcry here, wondering whether the two parts of it are true. He was, after all, a Christian, right? Not a Pharisee. And yet, he was in the main still that. As he says in Philippians, circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee. And as for second part, there is even more uneasiness. He says he is on trial regarding the hope of the resurrection. Some have said that he isn't telling the whole truth here, that he was charged with defiling the temple. But of course, these were red herrings anyway. The authorities persecuted him and the other believers because they insisted Jesus had risen from the dead. That was the central fact of Christianity. So, resurrection was indeed the basis for their hatred of him. But was it manipulative to put it this way? Perhaps, but it was already clear that he would not receive a fair trial in the Sanhedrin. He had already been struck in the face, contrary to the law. Best to let them pull their own house down, so the tribune could see that he would learn nothing from them. And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, nor angel, nor spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. Then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up and contended sharply, "We find nothing wrong in this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him?" Disagreement over the afterlife fueled suspicion and dislike between these groups. The Sadducees' position was basically materialistic, no spirit world at all. Barnes quotes the Jewish historian Josephus about this. "The Sadducees," says Josephus, "take away the belief of the immortal duration of the soul and the punishments and rewards in Hades." And again, "The doctrine of the Sadducees is this," says he, "that souls die with the bodies." Given how fundamental and emotional this disagreement was, it is no surprise that some of the other party seized on Paul's claim as support for their view and defended him. Note, though, that the resurrection of Jesus and the Christian faith went unnoticed by both sides. And when the dissension became violent, the tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him away from among them by force and bring him into the barracks. Imagine the tribune's frustration at this point. His one interest was to learn whether Paul was guilty of some crime under Jewish or Roman law. Don DeWelt remarks, "Claudius Lysias probably began to wonder just who this stranger was. He thought him to be an Egyptian, and yet he spoke Greek. When he gave him permission to speak, he spoke Hebrew. When he wanted him examined, he turned out to be a Roman. Nor does it end there. When he seeks the judgment of the highest court in Israel, they dissolve into chaos, leaving Lysias with still no answers. All he had was some kind of well-educated Roman Jew who seemed to be a lightning rod. The following night the Lord stood by him and said, "Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." The Spirit had spoken of bonds and imprisonment that awaited Paul, but nothing of the outcome. Paul badly needed this assurance that he would not die in Jerusalem, but would obtain his desire to testify of Jesus in Rome. When it was day, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 who made this conspiracy. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food till we have killed Paul. Now, therefore, you, along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case more exactly. And we are ready to kill him before he comes near." Two things are noteworthy here: the plot itself and its reliance on the chief priests and elders to connive with the assassins. But for the latter, we should recall that this same group had paid Judas to betray Jesus so they could kill him. As for the plot, Howard Marshall observes that it was ill-conceived at best. He doubts that the tribune would even agree to bring Paul back after the Sanhedrin had disgraced itself before, and a plan to kill a Roman citizen under military protection might be more dangerous to the plotters than to Paul. He adds, "The scheme as a whole is one conceived by fanatics without too much regard to its practicability." Moreover, the oath was not as ironclad as it sounded. The IVP Bible Background Commentary assures us, if Paul's enemies eventually broke their oaths to kill him, Jewish law would simply require them to bring atonement offerings to the temple. Thus, their oath here does not mean they would literally starve. Now, the son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush, so he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the tribune and said, "Paul, the prisoner, called me and asked me to bring this young man to you, as he has something to say to you." The tribune took him by the hand and, going aside, asked him privately, "What is it that you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire somewhat more closely about him. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, who have bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for your consent." So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, "Tell no one that you have informed me of these things." Then he called 2 of the centurions and said, "Get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix the governor." This was a remarkably large escort for a prisoner, even for a Roman citizen. But having seen 2 riots about Paul, and now learning of a plot to kill him, Lysias may well have feared another outbreak on the road, and tribunes were expected to preserve order. So he brought up 470 men, half the garrison, and ordered a night march. A modern Lysias would say, "Not on my watch." And he wrote a letter to this effect: "Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency the Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen." Felix was well known in Rome. Tacitus, in volume 9 of his history, says that he governed with all the authority of a king and the baseness and insolence of a slave. Despite his name, which means lucky, he was only 2 years away from being recalled to Rome in disgrace. Also, the tribune's carefully worded letter does not mention that he would have flogged Paul had he not been called down by a junior officer. And desiring to know the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. Rome did not enforce a conquered people's laws, and certainly not when they had something to do with local religion. Recall what the proconsul Gallio said when the Jews brought Paul before him. "But since it is a matter of questions about words and names and your own law, see to it yourselves. I refuse to be a judge of these things." And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. And on the next day they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. A night march of some 30 miles to Antipatris got them out of the most concentrated Jewish population, and was about the most that could be required of even fully trained troops. The remainder of the march to the capital of the province was safe enough with the contingent of cavalry. When they had come to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he was from, and when he learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive." And he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. It is not clear why Felix inquired about Paul's home province. Some have suggested that he may have thought of fobbing off this puzzling prisoner to another governor, but perhaps curiosity won out. Let's see if those Jews from Jerusalem have anything sensible to say. And after 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and spokesmen, one Tertullus. They laid before the governor their case against Paul. And when he had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, "Since through you we enjoy much peace, and since by your foresight, most excellent Felix, reforms are being made for this nation, in every way and everywhere we accept this with all gratitude. But to detain you no further, I beg you in your kindness to hear us briefly." Paul's accusers lost no time in coming to Caesarea, and they did not send underlings. The high priest, along with some members of the Sanhedrin, came in person and brought with them a professional lawyer. Tertullus opens his presentation by the usual flattery directed to a governor, but exaggerated. Felix did not have the rank that entitled him to the term Kratistos, most excellent. In fact, he was born a slave, but connived his way to power and influence. As for his administration of Judea, he had at least crushed some notorious robbers and assassins, but in other matters he was so corrupt that a delegation of Jews would soon go to Rome to accuse him. The emperor removed him for cruelty, and that emperor was Nero, cruelest of them all. For we have found this man a plague, one who stirs up riots among all the Jews throughout the world, and is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, but we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to find out from him about everything of which we accuse him. This one paragraph is Tertullus' statement of the Jews' case. Undoubtedly, his actual speech was much longer, but Luke here summarizes its content. The lawyer's first charge is that Paul is a plague, a strong word. It recalls the satirist Martial's line, "Non vitiosus homo es, Zoile," said vitium. You're not a vicious man, Zoilus. You're vice itself. So Paul was a virus, infecting the Jewish diaspora with his hatred. Now this might at first glance seem true. Everywhere he went, Iconium, Lystra, Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, Corinth, Ephesus, violence erupted. But of course, it was not that he successfully preached hate. Rather, it was hatred of his message that stirred up the mobs. He brought the good news of the Prince of Peace, but too many found that offensive and turned on him. His second charge, that Paul was a leader of the Nazarenes, was certainly true, but stated in this way, it assumed the Christians were some seditious organization, a mafia among the peaceful Jews. Then came the final charge, defiling the temple. But Tertullus presumably knew they could never prove this. Had Paul done that, he would have been killed on the spot. So Tertullus used a different verb. He tried, epeiresin in the Greek, to defile it. Now many older translations have an additional verse here. Verse 7, "And wanted to judge him according to our law. But the commander Lysias came by, and with great violence took him out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come to you." Experts in the study of the manuscripts have concluded that this verse was not in the original text. Just as well, since it's outright lies. Lysias intervened twice, in the temple area and in the Sanhedrin, and in both cases the Jews were not going to judge Paul, they were trying to kill him. Well, Tertullus ends by inviting Felix to cross-examine Paul directly. So ends our session this time. When we return, we will see that Felix will find this issue rather complicated.